Previously on
PetRock.
And unfortunately, it is actually the most disappointing thing I have ever played.
Today's video is brought to you by nothing. Getting this out of the way, no story spoilers / endgame gameplay will be discussed or shown in this video outside of their designated sections. When the time comes, I will be providing a spoiler warning and a time to skip to. There will be a mid to late game dungeon and location shown in another spoiler section, but there will be no context as to their place in the story. It's purely for the sake of gameplay criticism. If that is something you're not okay with, then feel free to skip that section, but keep in mind it's only gameplay. If you want to go in as blind as possible, just skip this whole video, okay? Next, all the footage I am using is being taken from a New Game Plus playthrough, specifically for footage. The experiences in this playthrough do not impact the overall feelings I have on the game. I am using New Game Plus footage for the sake of saving time on my own part, as it allows me to get to the parts of the game that would have taken me longer on a regular playthrough. As much as I would love to play through SMT V again, I am busy and want to get this video out sooner rather than later. I was not expecting to make this video, or any video on SMT V for the foreseeable future, yet here I am now, about to take a steaming dump on it. Half of the package at least. You know me, I rarely, if ever, cover a game's story unless I feel obligated to do so. So I might as well tell you how I feel about the story while I can. It blows. And if you like it, you should feel ashamed of yourself. Ashamed.
Back to you, Kojak.
But I'll save that for some other time, maybe. For now, I'm going to be talking about literally everything else in SMT V, so if you're worried about spoilers, don't be. I'll be primarily taking footage from the early game and will be sure to warn of any spoilers. Also, so I don't come across as a blind hater, I'm going to talk about stuff that I do actually enjoy in SMT V, starting with exploration and the overworld. One of the biggest things SMT V was advertising, which they did a great job delivering on. Similar to, say, Raido 1, the whole world feels like a dungeon, but this world is actually sick as hell. With the world being designed like a dungeon, you'd expect to be constantly engaged in the game with little to no downtime to relax, but nope, it never gets tiring since it's more exploration than navigating linear, thought-out spaces. When things do tend to get more intense in the overworlds, they're chunked so as to not constantly wear out the player, as well as a lot of the world being optional and up to the player's own curiosity. It hits a nice balance between being relaxing and engaging, and I like that a lot. Also helping this is that enemies are optional and easily avoided. If you play it safe enough, you'll barely run into any encounters while trying to explore your surroundings. Just don't ignore them for too long or else you'll be woefully underprepared, but that's standard with this type of design. Going back to what I had said a sentence or two ago, I had mentioned a lot of the world being optional. What I meant to say is that a lot of the stuff you could do and get in the world is up to how much you want to explore, with those who want to explore a little getting some rewards, and those who go through this shit like it's their life getting a lot of great stuff. Side quests are everywhere. There are item boxes for really good items, literal free experience, these newly introduced demon essences for new skills and shifting the Nahobina's affinities, relics for bobooks, and most importantly I find are the Koroks, who are the equivalent of the meme men in Breath of the Wild, except you consistently get great rewards for finding them. One of which is whenever you find 5 of these guys in a world, this sexy bro will give you a preset item which can become a lifesaver later on, and the other I will save for later. Another thing is that every area is different enough visually and mechanically to stand out, such as the first area being a rather standard affair, and the third area adding some fog and looking less like a desert, as well as some really large chasms. This approach to world design is great. It leaves the choices up to you, like who you want to fight, how much you want to explore, which constantly grants you great rewards, all while avoiding that homogeneous feeling of the world being nothing more than a playground and not an actual living environment. I love exploring for all the reasons I've said previously, and glory. Lots and lots of glory. The Glory system takes the app point system from SMT4, expands upon it, and perfects it by giving you a wide variety of passive add-ons, this time called Miracles, and heavily integrating it into the exploration of the game through the Meme Men and the Glory Crystals. Basically, you've got this list of passive add-ons to use, and they can be bought from this lady by collecting a certain amount of glory, which is primarily done through the aforementioned Meme Men and Glory Crystals, which they themselves are attained only through exploration. Sometimes, the game might throw you a bone and throw a Glory Crystal directly into your path, along with a few Meme Men, but if you put in the effort to find as many glory points as possible, you'll be rolling in them, and the rewards you get from them? So good. Also, a cool touch with the Meme Men is that this little dude will mark your map with the location of every Meme Men in the area, but he only appears towards the end of each area. And I kinda love this because you can either find the Meme Men and rack up the glory as you start the area, allowing you to purchase more miracles as you go along and be better prepared for what you find along the way, but you'll be missing some Meme Men possibly, and we'll have to backtrack if that's the case. Or you could decide to hold off on finding the Meme Men until the very end of the area to get all their locations marked on your map. So do you either wait to get all the glory towards the end of an area, potentially handicapping yourself, or do you get as much glory as you're willing to explore for the possibility of backtracking? And the most likely answer, do you just not care and find what you can? I like this. It's one of those play it your way kind of styles, with each play style having a pro and con to, how you choose to play. There's like no one good way to play. You play how you want, and you have to deal with that. Or you could just be one of those freaking losers who uses a map. That's always an option if you like being lazy. Okay, let's see. Side quests are mostly fun and rewarding. Sometimes they could be great challenges, or most of the time just a simple get here, do this, kill as many guys type of deal, which is lame. But they're overall solid, I want to say. At least do some of the side quests, since their rewards can absolutely kick butt and are super useful for late game. Sometimes. Lastly, combat can be fun and it has some good moments. My friend best describes press turn as being a fill the block combat system, and yeah.
This is a square. Can you guess which spot that goes in? That's right, it goes in the square hole.
Very true, but it's still satisfying to do, so fuck care, I'm dumb. And with that, I've said everything good about SMT V.
Bye, have a beautiful time!
My favorite thing in SMT and RPGs in general are boss fights. If done well, they can be some of the most engaging, fulfilling, and memorable experiences in all of gaming. Persona 2 Part 2 through Persona 5, Nocturne, Devil Survivor 2, Strange Journey, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, all games where I can remember at least 3 or more great boss fights, and all of which remain some of my favorite games in the series due to how they're capable of making every single fight so unique, challenging, and brain-taxing. A place I think SMT V really fails thanks to its newly introduced Magatsuhi system. The Magatsuhi system is this bar on the top right of your screen that appears in battle, and it builds up after every turn, either a little or a lot depending on your actions and how well you play. There's a lot more to it than that, but that would require me to get very technical, which, no. You just need to know the basics. It's all you need to know. Anyways, when the bar becomes full after a few turns, you're able to use a special Magatsuhi skill that could do a variety of things, such as guarantee critical hits to your entire party at the cost of draining the entirety of your Magatsuhi meter. At first, you start off with just one Magatsuhi skill, but when you continue the game, completing side quest after side quest, you'll be granted access to these talismans that correlate to a specific race of demon, granting the Magatsuhi skill to demons in your party of that specific race. And if you get far enough into the game, you'll be able to come across a miracle that allows for the protagonist to use these skills amongst other Magatsuhi related miracles. And if this sounds overpowered and very much in your favor, don't worry, it's balanced out by both enemies and bosses being able to use the Magatsuhi bar as well. And in comes my big problem with this newly introduced system. Sure, the enemies might be able to use the same advantages as you, but only partly, because all the main bosses you'll come across in SMT V use the same exact Magatsuhi skill. it's just the same default critical one that you have from the start. Boils down every single boss fight in this game to the exact same thing for the most part. I know not every boss fight feels like one another. They have their own little things to make them stand out, such as taking care of multiple enemies at once or having to sometimes come up with some special strat/skill. And if that's the case, what's so wrong with all the enemies using the exact same Magatsuhi skill, other than sort of making all the bosses feel homogenized? Well, that one guaranteed critical hit skill that all the bosses have, we use the exact same move every single time it is activated. And in SMT V, you could buy a few of these dampener items, as well as get these skills that null any move of a specific affinity. So what does every boss fight turn into at this point? You've guessed it. Learn what skill their coding tells them to do every time the critical Magatsuhi is activated, and retaliate by using the dampener to counter that. And honestly, that is kinda cool. The first few times, I was like, whoa, that's pretty interesting. Making me think outside of the box, and having to use the shop, and end the battle in a timely manner since I'm not able to use multiple dampeners. But the game just kept doing it, and it just became routine after that point. Just, no. So you just see what the boss does once, get the dampeners, try again, and wait for them to activate the crit, throw up the specific dampener and continue to set up until your turn ends, remove all their turns after they use their specific skill, and then use your free turns to wail on the enemy, rinse and repeat. And this is not to say the game never gave me any trouble, because there were some bosses that I got stuck on, but this was more so an issue of me having to become better prepared with the most relevant demons and skills, rather than consider an out-of-the-box strategy to beat the enemy. So when I get myself prepared for the next go-around, the fight just becomes, wouldn't you know, the same thing. There are only a few of these boss fights that I could really consider to be distinct, and a lot of these fights are few and far in between, sadly. And I think one of the easiest solutions to this issue of homogenized boss fights would obviously be to allow the enemies to use their specific race Magatsuhi skills, maybe on top of the critical one. It would have obviously made for more variety in the boss fights, having the player think of new strategies around these various skills, as well as showing the player what each of these skills did and why they're worth going after. It was right there, and they didn't do that, which I might understand why. Most of the Magatsuhi skills are frankly just inferior to the default one you have, the critical hit skill. Their effects range so wildly. A handful are useless and I only touched it once. Most are extremely situational, okay sometimes, or actually good and could be put alongside the default Magatsuhi skill, which I should remind you is being capable of activated by any demon no matter what. It sucks even more because, as I've said, you have to go out of your way for these skills / talisman and side quests, as well as having to purchase a miracle that allows you to use the other demon Magatsuhi skills, when your default crit one can be used by everyone at default. Seriously, there are only a few Magatsuhi skills I would consider are worth going after. You could argue that it's more of a preference thing from the player, but with how important crits are in SMT games, players new and old are bound to fall back on the critical hit skill. There are some solutions I have come up with to fix the uselessness / situationalness of most Magatsuhi skills. Starting off, I think the obvious solution would be increasing the capabilities of certain Magatsuhi, such as making certain skills last a little longer, like an extra turn or something, or have a more potent effect to make them worth using. If you're going to have them all cost the entirety of the Magatsuhi gauge, make it actually worth draining the full thing, or the alternate solution. Make certain skills cost a little less than the Magatsuhi bar to create a better balance so you wouldn't be giving up a goddamn MP heal in a game so strict on MP moves and MP restoring items for a heavy physical move that only might put the enemy to sleep. However, this would have to be balanced to account for potential Magatsuhi skill abuse. Like, you keep refilling the bar after using a skill that only uses a third of it, to eventually set up and cheese the boss fight or even most regular encounters. And if that solution does end up working, have bosses become maybe a little more challenging without a specific Magatsuhi skill you can get nearby, like they dodge a lot, constantly buff their evasion and debuff your team, which you can't remove since the Kaja, Kunza skills are very late into the game, but they're weak to a lot of skills. Maybe you could brute force your way through it and make do with what you got, or you could do a little exploration to find these skills. The guaranteed multi-hit skill, boosted evasion, complete debuff skills, those types of skills, to deal with the boss or something. I know this makes it sound like the Magatsuhi bar is the only way you're winning, but 1, this is a rough concept I just spat out, and 2, it would make the Magatsuhi bar feel like a more worthwhile addition to the game. 3, it'd help further fix that issue I have with the homogeneous feeling of the boss fights in SMT V, and lastly, it'd further improve and encourage the explorative side of SMT V. I really love this concept after laying all this out, and it just makes me so upset that it didn't truly capitalize on this new mechanic. It could have added a lot, yet it added barely anything. Just like the dungeons. Dungeons are an SMT staple. Most of the games in the series expect you to know going in you're going to be spending a good time in some dungeon. And I know a lot of people aren't the biggest fan of dungeon crawling and their dungeon crawlers, which is fine, kinda. People are allowed to have their preferences, but dungeons are one of the series' strongest points. With Persona 5, 2 Eternal Punishment, Digital Doo-Doo Saga 1, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, and Strange Journey being the cream of the crop. Especially Strange Journey. Sure, some SMT games definitely do them better than others, but almost every SMT game has a good emphasis on dungeon exploration. I should expect to see a good handful of dungeons whenever I pick up an SMT game. SMT V only has 2 in the entire game, one of which is pretty good, and the other of which is actually the most underwhelming thing since I've experienced Secret of Mana a year ago. And even if it were a case where both of the dungeons were great, SMT V also struggles with how it paces out its dungeons. Let me explain. All the dungeons there are occur at the end of the areas they're in. And with there being half as many dungeons as there are area, it kinda gives the impression that the devs weren't really sure what they wanted to do with them. So they just kinda went halfway, but that's just me assuming stuff, so don't take that as fact. It obviously would have been better to end off every area with a unique dungeon. Sure, even at the end of the day, there would have only been 4 dungeons, but Zelda Majora's Mask got away with having 4 dungeons, and is considered the peak of that series because they were all challenging, unique, and meaty. And if SMT V was only going to go with 2 dungeons, they should have all been extremely big challenges instead of just one decent one, and ugh. They also should have had it so, both of these dungeons were in the literal last half of the game to stand out as much. And you may have noticed that I left out one of the dungeons, one that also comes after the end of an area, this time towards the early half of the game. So this must make all my points null and void, right? Hell no, I didn't even bring it up because 1, I actually forgot this dungeon existed until recording footage. 2, it's barely a dungeon with 0 original mechanics. It's literally just you're going through hallways getting caught by demons. That's barely a mechanic. And 3, do you consider your school with the lights off to be a dungeon? Probably not. The school dungeon is just a distraction, if anything. Hell, taking it back to Majora's Mask, the side dungeon in the swamp was more memorable than this thing. Okay, tirade aside, my solution would be to have the first dungeon, the wind one, at the 50% mark of the game, and the other dungeon at the end of the game. And you could argue that the areas themselves are meant to be dungeons in and of themselves. I've argued that today, and I've done so here before. But if that's the case, why even have so few and poorly spaced out dungeons at all? Even Ride-Out 1, as dungeon-esque as that world felt, had a decent share of dungeons that were all spaced out, more than SMT V did in its 40 hours of game time. Basically, either have more dungeons, one for each area to make them feel equal, or if you have to stick with just 2, space them out instead of making them both happen at the later half of the game. And that goes for both solutions. Design them to be more monumental and meaty given how little there are in both scenarios. Dungeons are one of the best parts of this series. Sure, SMT V does a great job delivering on the explorative side of its world, but it fails with the dungeons being so lackluster, lacking and weirdly placed. It's just very upsetting after Persona 5, which had damn solid dungeons. And to cool my jets a little before getting into the final bit, let me get to some shorter points. Newly introduced spyglasses, I feel, are lazy. They allow you to get full information regarding an enemy, their weaknesses, skills, item drops, all of it. Overpowered to say the least. Sure, it cuts out the tedium to some, and in some instances are damn essential, but considering how cheap they are, you might as well tell me all the weaknesses and resistances of the enemies. It does make the meet them as less of a pain, thankfully, which I really do love. But instead of being able to buy them, maybe spread them out consistently throughout the overworld. either through the item chest, the relic spots, Samanazako, and then have them become purchasable for late game for Midama grinding. Having day 1 DLC is cringe. If you have this content, put it in the game instead of putting it behind a damn paywall. I'm already paying $60 for this thing. Or if you're gonna do this, wait a few months to release this look less scummy atlas. Money is way too tight. Of course, you never want to have too much money when you're playing the game for the first time. But even into the late game when I'm just trying to get stuff done, it just feels like a hassle when I have to go money grinding. Either that or maybe I'm not going out for relics hard enough. It just feels awkward. So yeah, according to my proofreader, this was a me thing. He was rolling in the Bobucks at the end of the game, so frick me, I guess. One of the most annoying issues that I could have made into a whole ass section is not being able to buy MP restoring items at all. Even into the late game, I think this would have been fine in any other SMT game. But in 5, moves cost so much. Especially the late game skills such as the buffs. Sure, you could argue it adds a layer of stress and tension to combat, but it just feels annoying, like having to go through and make a bunch of new demons and then switch them out when they run out of MP, and there's no way to refill them. It's tiring. And since that's the case, here's a tip. Get to this Pyrojack approximately 3/4 of the way through the game. He'll give you an MP restorative item for every 3 fire gems you get. Eventually you could buy these gems, so buy a lot of them and continue to trade them in for the item. They don't do a lot at this point, but hey, it's better than nothing. And also, there's actually one extremely useful Magatsuhi skill that allows you to restore a moderate amount of SP. MP? SP? I don't know. It is, you don't want to ignore this. I did on my first playthrough and I felt like a bozo. It's probably a preference thing at the end of the day, but I'd be okay with this if the MP economy was more balanced, or you were easily able to get more MP restoratives. And that also goes for a few other items like these. The game does look good, but I just wish this was not a Switch game. This runs horribly on the Switch, but hey. Maybe it's just my day 1 Switch speaking. Amanazako is loud and annoying. I prefer the starfish. Being able to warp to any previous save spot is weird and just leaves me with a sense of wrongness. Not sure why, but it just does. On the topic of save points, the store in the Cathedral of Shadows being in the save points cuts down on the tedium, but it also sort of makes everything feel less unique. That's just one of those personal things. And with that, I would actually like to get into my final point. However, this does require me to discuss stuff for the late game. Nothing related to any of the endings. It's mostly gameplay and story at that point, but if you want to avoid being spoiled on SMT 5, skip to this point to avoid doing so in 5, 4, 3, 2. The last area of the game and everything after was middling. Believe it or not, this is actually me trying to end on a minor, more low-key note. So if you're watching this far, you know how the 4th area starts. You got these 3 bosses, the leaders of Bethel. And if you try to go to them at the level you currently are, it's damn difficult. So instead of just grinding the nearby enemies, you perhaps go explore around the area for as many secrets, side quests, Mimon, and other stuff that'll help you. And when you feel like you're strong enough, you go and face the 3 bosses whenever. And it's unlike anything you've really experienced at this point of the game. It really rips off the open world band-aid SMT 5 was hoping to do, putting the greatest of emphasis on going anywhere, doing anything. Sure, you could fight all the bosses and somehow win, or you could find all the secrets in the area and come back when you feel prepared. It's all up to you. And I love that about it, but it does have that one issue that comes with this open-ended design. With the open design of this area and being able to tackle any of the 4 bosses in any order, it really feels as if after the first boss gets defeated in that area, they all tumble down. It top-loads its difficulty, and it only gets worse from boss to boss. And also, it doesn't do the best of convincing me these 3 are all-powerful gods. And I think what really causes the bosses to feel like this for me is that they all have the same exact level, which is good, as it's meant to account for the area's open nature, but as such it creates an entirely separate issue of the bosses only getting easier with the levels you gain and the demons you're able to summon after beating one another. Maybe it was meant to show that no one of them is more powerful than the other, some weird story reason I guess, but I frankly do not care, I just want a good boss fight. And there was a really easy solution to this. There should have been a level multiplier to each of the remaining bosses that kept getting defeated. It shouldn't have been that hard to do, and it feels like an oversight. Also, all these bosses fall into that similar boss routine I had mentioned earlier. Even the big super gods of the game understand how useless most of the Magatsuhi are. Ugh. You could also convince me it's meant to be a power trip of sorts before the final boss/dungeon, as if you're slowly getting more and more powerful, taking care of the biggest figures in each religion, and that nothing stands in your way, which, yeah, I guess that could be kind of cool to some. But I would have appreciated good, challenging boss fights instead. Oh, and the big thing that really pisses me off about this final stretch is that the dungeon that caps off this area, and the entire game by extension, is lame as hell, and way worse than the previous dungeon, which was actually pretty decent. Final dungeons in SMT games, no matter how annoying or easy they actually are, feel like these big things, with the length and mechanics of the dungeons meant to show that. SMT V just has these doors that if you pass through, you have to figure out which one you have to go through to make time resume or something. Woo! And while I know some people prefer shorter dungeons, which I also mostly prefer, especially towards the end of games, with SMT V having once again so little dungeons and ending on a big note of a clash between gods in a race to the throne, it really makes the climb up the final tower feel like nothing worthwhile. SMT games are really good at finishing off strong both mechanically and narratively, so the game is just really disappointing, especially considering what came before. Also, all the bosses I've fought so far are, once again, extremely disappointing. Literally the biggest weight that's it I've ever felt in the game. Oy, Vault, what a disaster. Seeing as SMT V is currently the big game in the series, I decided I would get on some extra people to give their thoughts on the game while the iron is hot. So here are a few quick thoughts from SMT fans and not SMT fan.
See, the issue with Shin Megami Tensei V is that it's a fine game. It's an alright game. It's infinitely better than 4 and debatably Apocalypse as well, but the issue is that it's one of those games that gets worse and worse the more you play it. It starts off really strong. I still think the first area is fantastic and what the entire game should have been like, and I also love how the final of the 4 main areas is kind of open and lets you walk around and just do shit in any order you want. But what I dislike about it is that, as I said, the more you go on, the more of the cracks start to show. For instance, there's stuff like the dungeons, which are just poorly designed, either way too short or way too annoying, and there's only like 3 of them, and the final one is just terrible, and in general the finale feels incredibly rushed, as if they didn't have enough time to properly make an ending, and alongside with the story they just scrapped something together from all the assets that they still had lying around, and then they just went, yep, here are your endings. It felt incredibly empty, and I honestly kinda wish that A, the game had stayed more in the oven, because it really needed more time, obviously, or B, just kinda changed around a lot, because in the trailers even, you see a lot of cool concepts and areas that aren't in the game, so I really have to ask, what the hell happened there? Because I was still thinking that, hey, maybe eventually those cool areas and moments are going to come. But they never did, and by the time I beat the game, I was left feeling very empty, and I don't know, I just felt like my time had been wasted around the time of the Demon Lord's castle. Especially because a lot of the coolest things in the game just go nowhere.
Alright, so, been asked by PetRock to talk about why I like and don't like Shin Megami Tensei V. So in case I need to do an intro, hey everybody, this is Spencer from Shin Megami Tensei Network here. So even after all these months, I find it really interesting how my opinion never really went down after reviewing SMT V. One of the big things that really stood out for me was how much I really enjoyed it visually as well as from a world presentation side. I've always been a really big fan of open world games, and while this was definitely not like the biggest and best open world, I think for a first attempt by Atlus, especially on the Switch only, it's one of the most unique open world games I've really played out there, and mixing all of the elements I really like from Shin Megami Tensei, like the characters, the demons, negotiating, with a open world experience that I can play on my big screen at home, I can take it on the go anywhere, was such a interesting experience that, like, even though it definitely has its problems, like, yes, I wish the story had a little bit more things fleshed out with it, the story that's there, still I enjoy because of the questions I found were really interesting. I wasn't looking for answers. They explained everything to the extent that, yep, I understand what happens in law, neutral, and chaos, and everything that ends there always makes me want more. Would it have been nice to spend more time with the characters? Obviously. There were lots of characters who got shafted there, but the characters that do get screen time, like Ichiro or Koshimizu, I really enjoy the story that's there. I'd say really one of the few characters that doesn't actually get a lot of acknowledgement for kind of getting shafted the most in the story, that doesn't make a lot of sense, is Kansu definitely gets the shaft, and a big one is actually gotta be Aogami. I think Aogami is a really interesting case of, unless you're talking about one of the 4 endings, it's very weird how quiet Aogami is through the whole experience, so would have liked to have a little bit more back and forth, kind of more consistent with you as the protagonist talking to him, but this is still such a crazy RPG that really stuck out to me, especially in a year like 2021 was a very uneven game in terms of big releases, but this has easily got to be one of the biggest and best games I played out there. Not overall best, but for sure something I spent the most time out of almost any other system I played with it. And even in a year of like really big heavy hitters for Atlas, like we also got Nocturne HD, which I'm sure a lot of people played for the first time last year, on top of the fact of getting Strikers finally released. So even with all of those kind of stacked against it, I'm still completely blown away by SMT 5. I really love the music. I still love the cast. I want more of it. Are there things I wish I could have changed? Of course there are. But at the end of the day, it was still a really fun experience that makes me excited for the future and makes me really optimistic, because this was the farthest thing from a safe sequel, or even just a safe game and entry into the series, because I think it's safe to say Atlas was pretty safe during the 3DS generation. Now it's nice to see them really taking a step forward into the future, and who knows where we go from here.
If I had to describe SMT5 in one word, it would be fun. Are the graphics stunning? No. Does the story wow you? No. Is the gameplay groundbreaking? No. Did I have a good time? And would I recommend this to any friends that were looking for an RPG? Yeah. As time has gone on, and the more I think about it, my opinions on SMT5 have changed a lot. I might have been in a little bit of a honeymoon phase when I got the game. The game starts off very strong in the beginning with the first area, and as it introduces its mechanics, it's really fun. The small quality of life changes they made to the press turn system were really good. Being able to pass even if you have a blinking icon is really nice. The spell visuals and the audio design is spot on. Never have I had so much fun just blasting someone with Bufudyne. Using Omagatoki Critical and blasting someone with a multi-hit move is really satisfying. The longer the game goes on though, the less fun it is. The strategy for each boss is pretty much the same once you get Luster Candy and Impaler's Animus, and that's just use those and your highest damaging moves, over and over again. Before that though, it has a good amount of challenge, until you realize that they can use Magatsuhi skills too, and when they do, it's the same move they use after that every time. So, for example, if a boss gathers Magatsuhi, and right afterwards they use Maziodyne, all you need to do is get in a Like Dampener, and you pretty much won the fight. Even saying that, you'd think that the dampeners would be very rare, but I always had a surplus of every single one I needed. Speaking of a Magatoki Critical, that's the only Magatsuhi skill I ever used in the entire game. It's incredibly overpowered, and the path of least resistance to chunking a boss down to half HP or just killing them. I say all this and it may come across as negative, but I'm not the type of guy that thinks difficulty is all a game needs to be fun. I think SMT5 is extremely fun, as I said before. It just loses its luster a bit. The gameplay starts really strong, then meanders a bit in the middle, and starts to pick up again at the end. Being able to handcraft your perfect build and the builds of your demons is awesome. While there's plenty more to talk about, specifically with the story, I was told to stick to gameplay with this section, so I'll leave it at that. I mean, I had enough fun to complete the compendium and get all 4 endings, so it alright.
SMT5 was, it was a game. I played and finished it at launch. Took me about a week to get all the endings. And I kind of haven't thought about the game much since, unless like someone else kind of brings it up. As I played it, I mean, it was fine at first. Obviously, I don't like to judge a game from the very beginning. You know, it showed promise with some of the characters, some of the, you know, scenes we saw. Like the whole Hydra sequence was pretty cool. I kind of liked the whole Nuwa sequence and the part after that when you go back to, you know, Tokyo. But, I don't know. It kind of fell off pretty quickly. Once you get, like, to the second area, story never picks up. And then, obviously, everyone knows how absolutely terrible the back half of the story is. Gameplay was alright until the whole level gating rears its head, which, to me, happened in the second area, where I realized that your level mattered more than your stats, which is weird. Music was incredible. That's like the one positive I always have to say about the game. I mean, it was a game. It kind of came and went, I feel. I'd probably give it like a 6 or something. I think initially I said 7, but I literally like never think about that game, so like it just wasn't memorable to me. Hopefully the next one is better, but I said after Apocalypse, so I don't know.
If you've guessed it, I am not the biggest fan of this game. I don't think it's really all that good, from the reasons I've laid out today, amongst other aspects like the most underdeveloped story and sort of forgettable soundtrack. Please don't kill me, I'm specifically talking about the battle tracks. You know, as you can tell from this video, I've used a lot of SMT V music. I think it's pretty good. But it was just the most I was ever disappointed by a game. I think because of that, amongst other reasons, this video became a lot larger than I was ever expecting it to be. I was like, you know, maybe 20-minute video at most, but it's probably gonna be like 40 minutes. And when I say SMT V is the most disappointing game I've ever played, I probably raised some eyebrows, but trust me when I say I don't play too many recent games, especially right when they debut. But for me, SMT V is just my own most upsetting release and one of my favorite series. But I am not mad, since it's still kind of fun. I know that sounds weird considering everything I've said today, but if I just turn my brain off, don't really think about it, I could have a fun time with SMT V's gameplay and get more enjoyment from than, say, Final Fantasy IX in its entirety. It's a good no-think game if I had to put it one way. I love a lot of the mechanics this game does have, but if it's not the exploration and open design, everything SMT V does has likely been done better in games made in the series years ago. Still, if you're interested in trying out this game, go for it. It's pretty cheap right now, retailing for a good $35, and a lot of the people that I've spoken to said they like it, including some of the people here today. Newcomers love it. I got the game for my friend's birthday last month, who was curious about the game, and she said it's pretty good. It's also doing big numbers for Atlas, so hey, they probably did something I'm just not seeing. And if you do decide to get the game, I hope you enjoy it. Atlas makes a ton of great RPGs, and if you like SMT V, give the other games a shot. I hope I didn't piss you off too much with this video, and if I did, let me know why so I know how to piss you off even more in the future. Don't forget to drink water, and have a good morning. Also, I finished this before Simply Dad uploaded his SMT V video, so don't go to the comments and say shit, but I know you already have, so I'm just saying this. So I can make you look silly later on for not watching the full video. So I watched a few more X-Men stuff as of recent, since the first SMT V video. I watched the first 4 X-Men movies, and they were okay, except for First Class, which was the prequel. I thought that was really strong. The other films were just, like, the films before it were just okay. Like, the third X-Men film was not as bad as I thought it was, except for the Juggernaut. They really did him so dirty. But, I don't know, like, they were just okay films, like, nothing too special. Like, they had their moments, that was it. Everything involving Magneto in the first film was really well done and smart. But, blech. I watched Evolution recently, which, after being really disappointed by the animated series, was, frankly, a huge improvement for me. In terms of how, like, told their stories and explored its characters. I thought it was really well done, and it was one of my favorite shows in recent memory. I'm surprised I enjoyed it as much as I did. and it ended on such a good note. I'm not going to say anything about it, but if you watch X-Men Evolution, the ending is so damn good. Let's see, what other X-Men things have I seen? I like the Quicksilver scene. I haven't finished the rest of Days of Future Past, but the Quicksilver scene is like iconic. So yeah, it's really that good. What else? I watched a bit of the X-Men anime on the Netflix. It was pretty cool. They look great in the anime style. Once again, Storm proves to have the most consistent taste in outfits, and that is pretty epic. One of my favorite things you could do in like any superhero show is like give characters regular outfits, because it's cool and funny to me. Just kind of humanizes them, and I think that's cool. I still need to see Wolverine and the X-Men, which is a horrible title and why I've put off watching the show, because I'm just that petty. It's like, where's the confidence in the other characters? Like, come on, the X-Men are like one of the most popular superhero teams ever. Why'd you do this? But I'm gonna finish all the other X-Men shows and stuff, and it's gonna be great. I'm gonna watch the rest of the movies. It's gonna be epic. And maybe one day I'll go over the like X-Men shows or something. Like, I really want to talk about Evolution at some point, because I do really love that show, and why as well I don't really like the animated series. But that would require me to rewatch the whole thing, so that won't be fun. Ignore the thing, the hairdryer in the background. It makes for character, and I'm not recording this again. What else? Yeah, that's really it though. Like, X-Men is cool. I've become a fan definitely after watching the animated series, which I did not like that much. And let's see. Tokyo Mirage Sessions video is going along well. The Makken script is done. I need to record it, get all the footage again. It's going good. Yeah, that's it. Bye.